Unlike Mr. Peterson, I do not see freedom of speech as being dependent upon how hot a property you are, or if your ideas are unpopular. For example, for much of the moderates in the United States prior to and during the civil rights era, the ideas of Martin Luther King Jr. weren't popular. The key reason that freedom of speech has been enshrined in the United States Constitution was to protect unpopular speech. And that's why I agree much more with renowned linguist and famously radical critic of U.S. hegemony, Noam Chomsky, in the area and on the ideas of free speech than I do with Jordan Peterson.
I don't mind the denunciations, frankly. I mind the lies. Well, I mean, intellectuals are very good at lying. They're professionals at it. Wonderful technique. There's no way of responding to it. If somebody calls you, an anti-Semite, what can you say? I'm not an anti-Semite. Or, somebody says you're a racist, you're a Nazi or something. You always lose. I mean, the person who throws the mud always wins because there's no way of responding to such charges. I do not think that the state ought to have the right to determine historical truth and to punish people who deviate from it. I'm not willing to give the state that right, even if they happen to
But are you denying that the gas chambers ever existed?
But I'm saying if you believe in freedom of speech, you believe in freedom of speech for views you don't like. I mean, Goebbels was in favor of freedom of speech for views he liked, right? So was Stalin. If you're in favor of freedom of speech, that means you're in favor of freedom of speech precisely for views you despise. Otherwise, you're not in favor of freedom of speech. There's two positions you can have on freedom of speech. Now, you can decide which position you want.
Well, I'm personally very skeptical about any form of regulation of any kind of speech. Now, the media don't even begin to approximate freedom of speech. I mean, this is the kind of freedom where people who own the place set the rules. So that's not real freedom. Nevertheless, the idea of even in that kind of system, heavily skewed towards extreme wealth, personally, I'd be reluctant. I'm very reluctant to see any kind of regulation take place. Freedom of speech is a really important value. Over the centuries, particularly in the United States, won a lot of, won substantial freedom of speech, and I think we ought to preserve it. However, with regard to the media, I think there's a much more serious question. Should the media be democratized? I mean, if the media are institutions of private power, we can be quite sure that they're going to have a particular take on things. They're going to give a picture of the world which, by and large, reflects the interests of their owners and their advertisers and other centers of power in the society. And that means that the attitudes and points of view and interests of the general public are going to be marginalized. And I think the answer to that is not, regulation, it's democratization.